Okay, so probably the biggest underrated story of this past week is this one here. Joe Biden signaling that he is now open to eliminating the Senate filibuster. And I just love this headline from the Wall Street Journal. Joe goes with the filibuster flow. I just love that rhyming and alliteration here. Now, like I was saying, this is a massively underrated story. This is probably one of the bigger stories of this past week, and it's also the one that not a lot of people are talking about because it sounds like a minor rule change. It sounds like, oh, well, okay, they changed the filibuster, whatever. Eyes are glazing over, ears are tuning out, whatever. But this is actually really dramatic, and I do think that it has the serious potential to change the way in which politics occur in this country for at least one reason. You know, politicians right now are allowed to run around and say that they're in favor of something, but then not actually have to push for the thing, because what they can do is say, I'm in favor of a flat tax, and then the entire time lament Democratic obstruction, or I'm in favor of this, I'm in favor of that, and then just lament obstruction. And so politicians are able to score cheap shots, score cheap points, and not actually have to push or fight for the things that they say that they actually believe in. And I think that that's a really, really, I almost can't even overstate how big of a problem I think that is for our democratic society. And actually eliminating the filibuster will go a long way towards enabling a situation, enabling a world where politicians actually have to fight for the things that they say that they actually believe. Because, you know, of course, one of the things that you can do as a politician is run around, say that you support one thing, and then say that you, well, in practice, I support this other thing because we can't actually get through this obstruction. And then, oh, when that thing that they say that they support in practice doesn't actually get through, then they just lament the obstruction the whole time, and they can score cheap points. They're just able to run around and attack the other side as their mode of political arguing for their own positions. And I think that that's a disaster. I think that it's actually a true tragedy for our American political discourse and our American political scene. And I think that eliminating the filibuster will go a long way towards breaking that thing down, breaking it down. Because, you know, one of the big objections, and I do want to respond to this, one of the big objections that a lot of people have to eliminating the filibuster if Democrats take over control in November, which is looking more and more likely, but is by no means a sure thing, is they say, well, okay, sure. So Democrats might be able to win over the Senate and then eliminate the filibuster and get a few more things passed this time around, but then eventually Republicans are going to take back over and things are going to go to hell in a handbasket really, really quick. And it is true, and I'm sure it is the case that, you know, if Republicans take over and then the filibuster has been eliminated, they will no doubt take it to their advantage. But I do think that, you know, at the end of the day, in a democratic society, electoral campaigns should have political consequences. If you run around saying that you're campaigning on a thing, I think that you should actually have to fight for that thing. And the way in which our system is currently structured, politicians can run around and campaign on things without actually having to face the electoral consequences for that thing, because all they can do is just say, well, I support a flat tax, and then just lament the Democratic obstruction. Or I support this, I support that, and then just lament obstruction and then not actually have to try to fight for the thing which they say. If it's more open, if it's clear that actually there is a way to actually get that thing done, we'll be able to see much more clearly, much more accurately what our representatives actually believe. So I do think this is a good thing. I do think that in the long run, this is going to be something which will be really productive, not just for Democrats being able to get things done in the Senate, but also for our democratic discourse, also for being able to have more transparency for our representatives. Because again, representatives will be forced to be at least a little bit more honest. Obviously, this isn't the solution to honesty, duh, right? I'm not claiming that, but I think that it will force representatives have a bit of an institutional check, forcing representatives to be a little bit more honest, a little bit more straightforward with the voters. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. So, you know, the other thing that I do think we do have to respond to when we talk about the filibuster is, of course, what exactly is the filibuster, right? Because a lot of people think that it's just, you know, one lone representative. It's, you know, Mr. Smith goes to Washington and he's lamenting the corruption of the Senate, and then he speaks until he passes out. In practice, of course, though, what the filibuster really is it's just basically a rule that, you know, 60 people are required in order to have a vote oftentimes, meaning that, you know, 41 members, just a minority, can completely stop any legislation from ever happening and from ever going through. And so very oftentimes a filibuster is basically just a vote not happening. It's so boring that it literally can't even be shown up on C-SPAN at all. There isn't even anything to watch in the modern day contemporary form of the way in which filibusters occur, right? Like, this isn't something where, you know, you're giving a lone state, a lone individual, the ability to bring about true change. And even if it was the case, oftentimes, again, the way in which it's been used has been for cases like Strom Thurmond trying to fight against civil rights, or trying to fight against healthcare, trying to obstruct against real systematic change and making our society better. So I don't think that particular concern holds up. Now, the other thing that a lot of people bring up, of course, is they say, well, the filibuster must have been brought in by our founding fathers for a reason, that our founding fathers were wise, and so they brought it in for a reason. Actually, that's not at all the case. That's not the case at all. The best we can tell, and there's a bit of a sort of academic dispute about the origins of the filibuster, but for the most part, and what most people seem to think, is that the filibuster actually originated from rule changes instituted after Aaron Burr left the Senate. You'll remember Burr is the one who, got into a bit of a hissy fit with Alexander Hamilton, and they had a duel, and then killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. He described the Senate famously as a sanctuary for our passions and frenzies. Ironic considering that he was getting kicked out for having a bit of a fit and killing Alexander Hamilton. That it's a sanctuary for our passions and frenzies. That it's a citadel for law and order and the preservation of our liberty. A very dramatic and a famous sentence and famous speech given at the Senate floor. But in that speech, he also said that it was really important that we clean up the rules for the Senate. And so what they did is they cleaned up the rules, and they ended up removing the rule which allowed for a vote to be had to stop someone from talking. And they didn't even realize for decades and decades after, and then finally someone figured out, oh, this means that I can just get up and talk and nobody can stop me. And so literally the filibuster was created by accident. This was an accidental creation, and it has absolutely been wreaking havoc on our country, especially for the past couple decades. You can see here, this is a chart of the occurrence of the filibuster. You can see here, literally since 1917, very few filibusters, sometimes used, and then massive increases. This is around sort of the civil rights era, where a lot of racists were trying to obstruct the civil rights movement and obstruct changes for racial justice and equality. And then, of course, now all the way up here, well, this is a few years old, but you get the point here. The filibuster becoming massively, massively more prominent as the Republicans are beginning to recede in prominence on the national scene and realize that they have to fight things tooth and nail in order to prevent anything from ever happening. And so it actually ends up just being a check to make sure that Democratic majorities never get the thing that they want done, leading, of course, to more and more polarization, leading, of course, to more and more obscuring of our democratic discourse. I do think that this is a good thing. I do think this is a good move. Now, Joe Biden, to be clear, isn't necessarily saying that he's open immediately to getting rid of the filibuster. He's saying here that basically that the fate of the filibuster is going to depend on how obstructionist they become, referring to the Republicans. So he's going to see, Joe Biden will look around and see, and Democrats in the Senate will look around and see, are Republicans obstructing things, which no doubt they will, and then they're going to try to change the rules. And the fact that Joe Biden is in favor of it now is massive, is again mammoth, because it does mean that for those Democratic holdouts, those Democrats who don't necessarily want to see the rule change, do think that the rule is maybe particularly good, there's going to be a massive amount of political pressure to actually move forward on changing the rule for the filibuster. So I think this is a good thing. I think this is a good thing. I've been very critical of Joe Biden on a whole host of things, on a whole host of things. I've said that, Joe Biden hasn't adopted any of the good policies. He still says that he's going to be vetoing Medicare for all if it comes to his desk. And then the few policies which he has adopted, which seem at least halfway decent, there's always the concern, is he actually going to fight for this thing? I think that if the filibuster gets eliminated, there will be at least more pressure, especially from activists, and the pressure will be felt more hardly, to actually fight for the things that he says he's going to fight for. So, I do think that this is a good thing, right? Like, I'm not here to just praise Joe Biden and say that this means that Joe Biden's perfect. Absolutely not. But I think that this particular decision, this one right here, is a good one. Now, I know this one's controversial, so let me know what you think about it down in the comment section below. But if you did like this video, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.